Thank you.
Okay, we're ready, Marcel. Let's
Okay.
try this again.
Start from the beginning. Anyhow.
But you have your back on the camera.
Okay, how do I do this?
How about
I want to.
here?
If you just stand over there, you
I'll stand over here.
Yeah.
Is this good?
Let me
Yeah,
just.
Okay.
it's better.
Better?
Okay.
Not that you have to see this, but anyhow, I really am happy to be here. It says that I'm a professor of semiotics and linguistic anthropology. It's true. That's over the last 20 years. But the first 25 years, and I was a professor of Italian. I taught Italian 100. I loved every minute of it. In fact, to this day, every time I go into a classroom, I have to stop myself from saying, buongiorno, come va? Because that's the impetus that classroom had for me. Loved it. So as I was teaching through the years, I noticed several things. Now, this is the 70s, so there wasn't much being done in the area that I'm going to be talking about. I would go into a classroom and I knew from the beginning that there would be characteristics in the way students took the input in and then produce it. I'll give you a simple example from the phonetic or phonological system of Italian. If I would give 3 words, quella bella padella, that beautiful frying pan, listen to it. I knew how they would pronounce it. It would never be quella bella padella, but quello bello padella. And I said, why is this happening all the time? And I started to realize as a linguist, well, they're using the knowledge that they have or the habits that they have from their native language and carrying them forward. Easy. I understood it. By the way, if you know anything about English phonology, the L in final syllable position becomes velarized, the tongue goes up, so it's kill, bill, will. Whereas if the Italians were to pronounce those words, they would say kill, bill, will. In fact, the hardest thing they did was when Bill Clinton was the president, they would say Bill Clinton. They have no trouble with Trump. I don't want to get into Trump or Trump or whatever. So this happens all the time. It's unconscious. The L1, and the way to put it is that the L1 has an effect on the L2. To what extent, when, where, or how became a target of much research within applied linguistics already starting in the 60s. However, as I went along, I noticed that certain things never really quite were synchronized with the way native Italians used the language. One day in class, just to give you an example, and if you know Spanish or French, it will make a lot more sense. It was a hot day, so I asked one young lady, come va? How's it going? And she answered back, sono calda. Now, to an Italian, sono calda, in English, I am hot. That means I am horny. She had no clue about that. I didn't want to correct her in class, so I went to the male student next to her, says, e tu, anch'io, sono caldo. I felt like, okay, one of the two of you just leave the room. And they had no clue what was going on. Now, you may say, that's idiomatic. They're thinking in English. However, it is not just idiomatic because the same shift of verb from sono to o, in Italian, you would have to say o caldo, and I'll come back to that later, which is the same in, I guess, in French, j'ai chaud. Is that it? Or tengo calor, or whatever it is, caliente, whatever it is in Spanish. I said, this happens in other areas. It is not just idiomatic here. If it occurs elsewhere, I have patience, I have sleep rather than I am sleepy, then there must be a system behind it. I had no theory. This is the early 1970s. There was no theory. I had a sense for it. But my idea was that you can be linguistically fluent, but not conceptually. I had no clue what to do. I remember in the late 1970s, I went to Georgetown University Roundtable. I presented this and I gave it a name. I called it, they lack metaphorical competence. I left it at that. The year after, a linguist and a philosopher wrote what is now a classic book, Metaphors We Live By, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. I said, I got it. What is happening here is our definition, our view of language at the time is that it has a literal base and that everything else is derived from it. And I said, that's not what happens. Most of this, when you take a word on its own, then it may have a literal meaning. Put it together with other words, and it acquires associative. I had a theory, I had a model, I guess I needed, and I called it conceptual fluency. And I'm going to discuss what it is today. And it really came to a head around 1990s, 1995. And I started to write on it, I started to discuss things, and then I started to see empirical evidence saying that this makes sense. All right, so I'm going to just update it today. I don't do this anymore. I'm not a language teacher. Still love it. I was teaching the kids of my doctor Italian, and I was using the insights that I had derived everywhere. I got some of these insights a long time ago when I was dealing in Italy with children who had problems processing information because of either brain damage or anything else. And I noticed patterns that were emerging there. I'll bring them forward as well today. So what the heck is conceptual fluency? Before I get to this, I picked up a book by a man named Charlie Crocker. It's an interesting book because it's the kind of book that when you travel and you go to hotels, you will see that are not in non-English speaking countries, you will see signs written in English. And it's hard to figure out what they mean. One of the signs that he starts with is this. In a Paris hotel, it says, please leave your values at the front desk. That's hilarious. Leave your values. What they meant is, of course, valuables. Now, it seems like a simple shift, but what was happening, the translator or the one who had studied English, valeur, value, no difference. So what happens is he or she was thinking in French and taking English words and putting them on the French thought. What happens is a sentence which is in English, but with the conceptual system of French. Here's some other examples. I have no clue how to translate them, but let's look at them, and you'll get the idea that I call these all conceptual errors. Instructions on a Korean flight. Upon arrival at Kimpo and Kimbahie Airport, please wear your clothes. I guess in English it would be, please don't forget to bring your clothes with you. Number two, on a Danish airline, we take your bags and send them in all directions. On an air sickness bag on a Spanish airplane. Bags to be used in case of sickness or to gather remains. See what's happening here? Let's keep doing this because this is students do this all the time without us knowing it. In a hotel room in the Canary Islands, if you telephone for room service, you will get the answer you deserve. In a hotel room in Italy, this is one of my favorite. Unfortunately, the hotel is not endowed with restaurant. Because I know exactly what the Italian version is. Non è disposto di ristorante. In a hotel in Hamburg, Germany, it is our intention to pleasure you every day. In a hotel in Tokyo, guests are requested not to smoke or do other disgusting behaviors in bed. And finally, in a bar in Norway, ladies are requested not to have children in the bar. Okay, you'll say, this is hilarious, but if you know the language, here's what's happening. There is the English language, that's the L2. There's the language they know is the L1. They're not just transferring the syntax or the grammar, not even the semantics. They're transferring the concepts, and then clothing them with the words of the other language. So what you get is Korean thought out sentence with English words. That's these sentences do not lack grammatical correctness, they lack conceptual correctness. So the idea is to separate L1 and L2 into C1, conceptual system 1, and conceptual system 2. So the interference is, there's L2, it's the C1 that is interfering into the L2 and not the L1 directly. They'll say, this is nuts. How do you correct it? How do you get to it? Well, you still need a theory. And you need a model that says most of language is, most of discourse, not language, most of discourse is based on figuration, on an associative structure. So that when you speak, we're not aware of it, that the speech itself is so associative, it just has tentacles into the figurative domain, which is then connected to the cultural domain, which then doubles back on the language, and the two are integrated. Separating culture is impossible from language. It's in it, it's imprinted in it. So, oh God, this is actually, I should talk about this because this is absolutely interesting. I was teaching at the University of Lugano for many years, and at the University of Lugano, they have students from different linguistic backgrounds. So one day I recorded this. One student said to the other, I'm involved in an affair right now, and thus cannot help you out. Oh, and the other one says, well, I'm happy for you. I hope it works out. The second one knew English. What he meant, affair, sono coinvolto in diversi affari, he was thinking in Italian, in things. But in that context, the way affair is used to any English speaker means one thing and one thing only. It branches out into the use of the connotation of affair as a romantic escapade of sorts. So the name for this, rather than call it interference or an error, I use a word that comes out of contact linguistics that goes back in time. It's called a calque. A calque is not just one language going into the other and modifying it through interference, but the concepts in that language being imposed on the structures of the target language. Examples would be, the classic example of a calque is the translation of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Karamazov Brothers. That's what should be the translation. It is translated instead as the Brothers Karamazov. In study of languages in contact, and I did a lot of that early on with the Italian spoken in Toronto, I would notice that there was straightforward loan words which were adapted, nativized into the Italian language. For example, mortgaggio, you can figure that out instantly. That's mortgage, taken in and Italianized phonetically. But then I would notice things like, oh, vado in bassa città. I'm going down town. Bassa is low, down, town. That's not an interference. That's a calque. Down, town. It should be in Italian, centro. I'm going to the centro. It's interesting when colleagues would come and visit me from Italy, they would say, your centro is so beautiful. Why do people keep on saying that it's a ghetto? Because bassa città means the lower parts of the city. I said, oh, it's a calque. Don't worry about it. And does this happen in student speech? Well, let me tell you that I had a student in the late 90s, just before I left the Italian department, who did his PhD thesis on this. What he did was go around to several schools and collected errors, and then, classify them into syntactic and he found that the conceptual errors, this, far outweighed the other types of errors from the beginning and were the most resistant to being eliminated, if you want to eliminate everything. So, unfortunately, his name was Jerry Russo. When he came to Toronto to study with me, he fell in love and gave it all up. I wouldn't recommend. I have a lot of people in my classes fall in love. So I say to people, if you want to avoid marriage, don't come to my classroom. Including the current dean at UTM met his wife in my classrooms. I don't know what it is about my classrooms, but if you're not interested, stay away. Anyhow, so I said to myself, there are various things going on here in the student's mind. It is a way to understand it. And I was using the idea of conceptual metaphors, which I will get to soon, and the idea of the image schema. The image schema is very crucial in all of this. All of a sudden, I see it occurring everywhere in language pedagogy. I had at the beginning, a hard time communicating this to my colleagues because it was something that wasn't still intrinsic to theoretical linguistics, let alone applied linguistics. So there are 3 levels of calquing. First one is the best one. It's coincident. The thought, let's say you're doing Italian, right? You're thinking in English, the same thought in English with the same words and the same syntax can be calqued onto the Italian words, and you get a natural or native sounding result. I'll call this coincidence, the level of coincidence. So he is going to school in English, goes into Italian. Lui is going, va to school, a scuola. That's the easiest thing to impart. This has pedagogical consequences because I actually did a number of textbooks in Italian. Some of them are all still on the market, self-study ones, where I did this. I actually, without saying it. And they seem to be selling well to this day. Some of them go into a 5th edition. So they seem to be synchronized to how we pick up languages and go gradually into them. I'm not ignoring grammar or mechanical correctness. Much like teaching, much like learning an instrument like the piano, you still have to do scales and chords, you have to do fingering and so on in order to deliver or realize the performance of a piece. But at the same time, there is a level of interpretation that is involved that goes a bit beyond this. So I'm not absolutely against that at all. It's how to integrate. First level. Second level, I'll call it structural calquing. This is as close as it comes to syntactic interference, but I'll call it, for the sake of argument, structural. So, for example, he is enjoying school. He is enjoying school. You cannot do that in Italian. Lui sta godendo la scuola. Doesn't work. You have to use the verb piacere, which drives students crazy, and reorganize it structurally to school is pleasing to him. Got it? That's the end result. So it becomes a lui piace la scuola. This, by the way, the first level happens rarely. It is, I wish it would happen a lot, even in related languages like English, like Spanish and Italian. It doesn't happen that often. It happens more in those languages, but certainly it's almost non-existent, that level, in phylogenetically unrelated languages. So that's the second level. And the third one is the one that's crucial to conceptual fluency. And I'll call it simply a conceptual calculus. So he skipped school a lot. There is no way to simply say, lui salta la scuola. The Italians will say, what do you mean? Does he use a skipping rope at school or something? It won't work. Never works. So that has to be reconceptualized completely with new vocabulary, ways of putting it together. By the way, it's Lui Marina, La Scuola, which is kind of interesting in itself. When I was teaching, I noticed that the students did not resist this. When I introduced it systematically, they would say, this is interesting. And guess what? Once you do teach directly to it, it sticks to memory. When you assume it or treat it as an exception or a deviation, it doesn't. It dissipates. I don't know why. That I have no reason for. So we come to what I would call this is the, I forgot about this.
Okay, sorry.
So you have English to Italian. At the coincidence level, you can think of it as going this way. At the structural level, it's getting close here, but at the conceptual level, it goes there, and therefore it has to tap into the C2, what's there. In the past, one of the methods I use, I don't know if you ever heard of the grammar translation method. It is a very difficult method, actually, for students to use because it assumes that you know grammar and how to use grammar as a filter to learn the language. But the second part, translation, was to me the most useful at the time. And it was, in a sense, discarded, and writing about it, translation doesn't help. But I found that it did, because when you do translate, you gotta make adjustments all the time. And by making those adjustments, you really are training yourself in conceptual fluency. I thought to myself. I'm not saying to use translation at all. I'm saying that when I did use it, I found that the conceptual system went higher and higher. By the way, grammar translation was used from the very beginning in the reading method in universities in the United States during the 1920s, because universities at the time, if you went to get a degree in French or Italian, what you went and got it in was French literature or Italian literature. So the language teaching was geared towards getting you quickly to read texts and to be able to translate them. So a lot of the early methods in universities were based on this. It's still the easiest way to teach. Give a rule, take it in, translate it, and then take this text, read it, and tell me what it means. That's basically how the reading method works. But does it produce fluency, conceptual fluency? I'm not sure it did. I'm not sure any of the methods that I knew of that I was using ever did. And to this day, it's hard to believe that still conceptual fluency is a very, very difficult thing to master. Linguistic, verbal fluency, not bad. The other two levels, coincidental and the structural. The third one probably requires, I hate to tell you, probably requires living in an immersion context and picking it up. On the other hand, I'm going to propose to you today that there is a way to teach it. There is a method. There is an indirect way to do it. I'll get to it in a minute. It takes an awful lot on the part of the teacher. This is why I don't prescribe it. It really involves the teacher. The system can't do it on its own. Okay. So let me distinguish between, you must have heard linguistic competence, right? Communicative competence. Well, this is more than those two. So there may be a third level of competence, which I'll simply call conceptual competence. That's the ability to think in the language. I know that applied linguistics, certainly in my own era, tried to avoid this because it had overtones of being Whorfian and relativistic, and that wasn't cool. I'll use an interesting metaphor, which you cannot use in Italian. I cannot say, quello era fresco. You didn't get the joke. That was fresh. So until work in cognitive semantics and certainly what is now called blending theory has brought forth so much data and so much research that says you can't avoid this anymore. Oh, it's easy to start with literal language. It is, with formulas, communicative formulas. And then, okay, student, you're on your own. Think when you can. This says that it's the typical semiotic approach. it turns it on its head. It says meaning is first, form is second. So you go from meaning to form rather than from form to meaning. If you've taken any semiotics, let me put it in semiotics term. It's not that hard, semiotics, right? It sounds like an abstruse thing. It's kind of straightforward. Semiotics thinks of language and other things as signs. Okay, signs could be words, could be images, and so on, and doesn't see them as separate, but as interconnected through the meaning system, the code. So, the simplest one of all would be what comes out of Ferdinand de Saussure, to think of the sign as having two main parts, and I'll use just that. The better one to me is the one by Charles Peirce, but too complicated. That the sign has a form, like a word, and your mind, when it hears the form, for example, cat, it instantly recognizes that as having a meaning, which is the second part, which is the image that it evokes. Two parts. The formal part, the sounds themselves and the way it's written, is called the signifier. Got it. And the second part is called the signified. Now, let me rephrase all of this, that as students learn the new signifiers, they're using the signifieds of their native signs. So when they go to a foreign culture, as we saw here, they're using signifiers, but they're not resounding with meaning. Let me add, if those signifieds branch out into connotations and into metaphor, then they really don't know what's going on there. You cannot laugh at jokes. You cannot really communicate in a way that is rich with meaning. You simply try to communicate information straightforward and get out of there. So it is a semiotic approach. I'm not hiding it. But I think everything is semiotics. I'm trained as a linguist. I teach linguistics, but the world is semiotics, the profusion of signs everywhere. So conceptual competence is what I'm aiming for. Let's go back to the. Oh my God, it's okay.
What do you want to move forward to?
I'm also. This is good.
Yeah.
Let's look at the I am hot. No, forget it.
No?
Nah.
Hold on.
Let's do this. Let's do this.
Yeah?
Let's do this. Yeah, let's do that. I don't know where this is. I wrote too much.
Tell me where you want to go. I'll find it.
I'm bored at myself. Okay, let me look at what.
Oh, here,
people,
I am hot. I am hot. That's where you.
Forget about it.
Yeah.
Let me summarize what the research in using conceptual fluency theory has discovered. There's a lot of it out there. You can Google it and you'll find it. I ended up writing a summary book. I think it came out last year with a minor press. I didn't want to waste time with Cambridge. Correct this guy. I'm becoming more and more impatient with this nonsense game that we academics play. This guy knows better than you. Leave me alone. I'm Italian. I know I'm right. Right. So I did it with them very quickly, although I have published with major presses in other domains. And it's called simply Conceptual Fluency Theory and Foreign Language Teaching. So what I summarized in there, I went through all the research. I got in contact with people. A lot of people in Iran use this model to learn English. I actually sent you some of the studies. They've written PhD theses on it, finding that going from meaning to form, in the end, is more effective than going the other way around, going from the signified to the signifier. So they found that without this direct training, without focusing on meaning, students are incapable of conceiving their message precisely in conceptual terms. And that's true. If you teach a language, you will see this. It gets frustrating. You didn't understand what I said? No. Okay, let me tell you. Let me translate it. Oh, I get it. How to get around that, right? At the beginning, they're not going to get it. Number two, unless there's coincidence. Okay. Number 2, they are able to conceptualize the message, but then cannot find the correct words to express it. 3, the other possibility is they are able to conceptualize the message and then can program it appropriately. That's the goal. This is rare, but it does happen. However, because some messages carry with them cultural reverberations, see, students bring with them cultural schemas and perceptions. Some of this conceptualization is not possible to be grasped. It just doesn't exist in the realm of knowledge. It's like learning to think anew. Seriously, new thoughts. I never figured this out. We were talking about hypotheses. There are languages that don't have the conditional if clauses, contrary to fact clauses. How do you get this across if it's not there? Got it? And if you consider it important in the language you are teaching. Okay. There is a scale. Do we have this scale? No, I didn't put it
No,
up
you didn't
there
have
yet.
that.
I'm gonna, yeah.
I can check. What do you want?
Let's go to that. Forget this. Let's go back to the those conceptual metaphors. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you approach this? This, in my view, this is a theory of thought. This comes out of a little further back. Yeah.
Yeah,
There we go. The concept of conceptual metaphor. Some people say it's passé. No, it isn't. I don't know. In academia, we always want to do new things all the time. Well, tell a mathematician, you know, the Pythagorean theorem is passé. I want to do something else now. No, you don't. There is a historical flow. If you cut that historical flow, you're not doing science or pedagogy or anything else. So it's not passé. Lakoff himself, who's now retired, has expanded a little bit, and because what is very chic today is neuroscience, and he too has become smitten by the neuroscience bug, so he has the theory called blending, which is interesting. I prefer this one than the blending he has now, which I have used, as you know, a lot. What is a conceptual metaphor? Is this ever, have you ever heard about this thing? If not, it's worthwhile going through this, because what is missing is the ability to, what I used to call, metaphorize. But the metaphorization is not just what you think metaphor is. So let's look at it. Let's look at happiness. Happiness in English is expressed with a sense of going up and sadness down. Now think about it. There is a physical sensory aspect to it. Does it come out in the language? It does. No matter what, she always feels up to it. But today she feels down. The response boosted my spirit. My mood sank after I was told what happened. That joke gave me a lift. If you talk these are the linguistic metaphors. You are thinking that. That is a formula. That is a schema that's in your brain. If it's not there, it needs to go there if you're going to learn English. Got it? So this is not just a simple flowery form of language. Let's go on to the next. I'll show you what happens. It doesn't just stop there. Now, health and good events are up and sickness are down. What? In other words, could it be that in the language, the same types of expressions and metaphor connect these two areas? They sure do. So, my family is at the peak of their health. Yesterday, my cousin fell ill. That job is an uphill struggle. The zombies will rise from the dead. That company is sinking fast. Could you speak this way in a different language?
French,
So, got it? It would be very difficult to do. I know I would have a very difficult. I have to tell you, I taught Spanish for 2 years, and I had no knowledge of Spanish at all. Don't ask why I was asked to speak Spanish to teach it. The dean said, you have to teach Spanish. I did. It was funny because the first thing, he said to me, well, Spanish at the time was the difference, right? First day in class, I was teaching Spanish 100. I'm telling you this because I did the same things. I calced. I did some lexical calc, and the first day says, I'm going to really impress my class that I know Spanish. I didn't. So I said to my class, I looked at the door and I said, it's porta in Italian. Diphthongization occurs in Spanish, so it has to be puerta. So I said to everyone, todos, la puerta, everybody, la puerta. See how good, eh? So I go to the window and I say, well, it's finestra in Italian, so it has to be finestra in Spanish, right? So todos, la finestra. La finestra. One student said, but sir, in the book it says ventana. Damn. Ventana. A type of finestra. That's how I got out of it. The whole course was run like this from me. I felt conceptually in a vacuum. I would rely on Spanish. I was lucky. The difference between estar and ser is similar to the Neapolitan dialect, and I'm a dialectologist, could use it. The difference between par and por threw me off. So one day, here's the Danesi rule for how to learn it. Guess. You've lost your sense of humor, huh? Okay, let's keep going.
I'll be back. I need my charger. Keep going.
Okay. Light is knowledge, dark is ignorance. During the lecture, I was illuminated. Don't leave me in the dark. That explanation is clear. You got it? These words and these structures do not come idiomatically. They form a system connected to a conceptual metaphor. Got it? Where did she go?
She needed her charger.
Oh, she needed a charger. Oh, so how do I go forward?
Yeah.
Here's this one? Okay. Theories are buildings. This is a well-constructed theory. The theory is on solid ground. We talk like this all the time. Do you get it? We're not aware of it. It's an unconscious thing. If you thought about it, let me tell you, I taught English at George Brown College way at the beginning. I was dirt poor. I was 1969. I had just gotten married, and I was just entering graduate school. So you want me to play in a dingy spot? I could play. I'll do it. You want me to teach it? I'm there. And I taught him. I have to tell you, I'll never forget this class of students from Japan, all men, 20 men, which scared the hell out of me when I went into class. I'm not used to it. All dressed in suit and tie, and I'm dressed like this. That scared me. So I was trying to be friendly. How's it going? What's your name? And so on. Nobody said a word. By the way, after the class, the director calls me and he says, they all want to drop your course. Why? They said, they didn't think you were teaching them. They said you didn't have any grammar. So I went in class the next day saying, the article. They all were down. Wow, love it. I'm not joking you. But as the course went on, I started to do things. I started to introduce things like, what's the point of what you are doing? Your ideas is very interesting, but it's a little circular. And they said, are you talking geometry? At that point, I realized that they had no clue how to connect the conceptual metaphor of ideas to geometry, which we do all the time. Where's your point? It's circular. This is a very square idea. It's tangential. It's parallel to mine. We're not aware that we've used geometry, brought it in as the source domain, as it's called here. I'm not going to go into the theory, and then use it to deliver the concept of ideas. Totally unconscious. And if you don't have it in you, you're talking geometry. I'll give you an analogy to it. In English, to say you're very fortunate, you say you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Right? Now, it is an idiom, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. If I were to, one of my students in English who of Italian background says, oh, I was born with a shirt on. Because that's the equivalent in Italian, not the con la camicia. Got it? It means I was born with a silver spoon in Italian.
Yeah.
But you're not born with a silver spoon, you're born with a shirt. Once you haven't got that formula, what you say becomes literal. That's the main lesson that I learned from this, and as I went on. Okay, let's go on. Ideas and theories are plans. This is kind of interesting. Let's keep going. Ideas are commodities. She doesn't know how to package or sell. Market, worthless. Keep going. Okay. Let's let it go. Okay. Okay. What is happening here? What is happening is that when we put, if I take the word point by itself and I say define it, what you're going to think of is the geometrical. As soon as you use point together with other words, the chances of it becoming metaphorical are very high, extremely high. In other words, the difference between language as a set of structures and units that are isolatable versus language which is a holistic phenomenon of putting these together is a different way of understanding and reasoning. And it's not just syntax. I would claim to you, and I haven't got time to, honestly, if you're interested, you know what I'll do? Contrary to my publisher's thing, I'll send you the PDF. You can have it. Because I go through all of it. I go how grammar goes through it. Absolutely. Just send me an email. Done. Just shut up about it, okay? Because otherwise I get killed. Use it. Quiet. Who cares? Now, next thing. Oh, keep going to the next one. I'll show you how the model that comes out of it. Keep going. Keep going. There, got it. Okay. So, this is a model of how conceptual metaphors coalesce and form a kind of network. These are called the source domains, and that's what you're going to be talking about. Here's how discourse functions. I'm going to show you, and I call it a mental navigation. You know what? I can't quite digest that idea because it's really out of fashion. Although it has deep roots, and I do see many of the points of that idea. I do see them, but you know, nobody can sell it because it hasn't got a strong foundation. I said nothing. Nothing. But I delivered my concepts. Got it? Right? I navigated. That's conceptual competence. The ability to do that. Got it. If it's not there, they're not going to do it. They're going to take a different circle, put it there. Now, it doesn't stop there, because when these source domains coalesce or converge around a target, some of those are also connected to other abstractions, got it? Forming, if you bring it all together, something that looks like a semantic web, an association of structures that are all navigated. Now, is this only internal to language, or does this then reflect the culture and the worldview that users of that language possess? Yes. And does it lead to symbolic and actual agencies and behaviors? Yes. I'll give you a silly example. I'm going to use, since we talked about romance in my classes before, I'm going to use conceptual metaphors for romance. Here's how it works. Here's how it works. I'm gonna divide a love over here, and I'm going to say there are ways for me, the source domains that coagulate around it. I'm going to use one. You've heard the expression, "Oh, love is so sweet." Are you going on a honeymoon? I love the moon. I've tasted it so many times. Got it? In other words, the idea that love is a sweet taste is not only in the language, but in behaviors. Watch. If it's in your brain, it's in the culture, then there are going to be symbols and rituals connected around. Case in point, St. Valentine or Valentine's Day. What kind of, I don't know, food items do you bring? Would you bring to your loved one some chicken? Say, here, I love you. Here's fertility. There you go. What would you bring? And what taste do they have?
Sweet.
Okay, no way around it. I don't know which came first, eh? The language or the experience. It's called experiential or embodied linguistics. That's what they call it. That's what it means. Okay, I'm not sure. I actually traced the origin of that to chocolate. I wrote a book on it called The History of the Kiss, and to it even affects that. You know, if people meet their lips and exchange saliva, it's one of the most disgusting things you can do, unless there's a metaphor behind it. Got it? If there is, then it's a kiss. It's not just, ooh, why are they exchanging saliva? That's how powerful the connection is between this and that. I always had a hard time separating culture when I was teaching Italian from the language. So let's do some cooking, bring in some nice, yeah, but the way you talk about it, about the food you bring in, is also the way you think about it. I never saw the distinction. I'll let it go at that, okay? In fact, it is now called cultural linguistics rather than cognitive linguistics. It has expanded. The anthropologists have got on board on it, and on and on. So if you look at this one here and you look at ideas, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm going to look at it. Why do we say they have deep roots and so on? And are there any symbols? Well, in the first universities in Italy, the symbol of achievement was a laurel wreath, which you wore on your head. That's a plant. The symbol at U of T of knowledge is what? It's a tree, which has branches. Do they still have the beaver in that logo?
Yeah.
They used to have a beaver, which is very peculiar to an Italian. It has a few obscene overtones, by the way, when you see a beaver under a tree. Okay. Got it? Do not take any sign for granted. That's the lesson I learned from here. Is it buildings? Sure, because ideas have to, teaching occurs in buildings or in non-buildings like gardens, the Academy of Ancient Greece that Plato founded, and on and on. In other words, there is a history behind these that is brought to bear on the language that expresses it and uses it. So at the same time that they're learning this, they're learning the history, the historical flow. You cannot disconnect history from this. And actually, you can twist history. I don't know if I told you, I'm writing a book on Trump with a major publisher, and it's driving me crazy because his language is scary. It's the scariest thing I've ever read, and it's exact to that of Mussolini. As an Italian, I translate them, I look at them, I've never seen such racist language in my life, in my own life here. But it's subtle, it's by innuendo. And that's exactly what Mussolini did. So it's a marvelous use of, guess what? Conceptual metaphors. Boy, the orator is a skilled metaphorizer. So this is not just a simple, in my view, model of everything. I'm telling you, it is really a powerful form. Okay, let's go forward, and I'm going to try to conclude. I got lots of things to go here. Keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back. No, pedagogy. Okay. No, where it said pedagogy. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Here.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Yeah. Sorry.
This is Oisy. I'm a teacher. I love all this, but it has to have a practical outcome. I never quite developed a syllabus based on conceptual fluency, but I incorporated it in my own teaching, and I actually wrote a complete Italian course book published with, I think it's John Wiley, can't forget, it's now out of print. They're not republishing it, called Adesso now, and a follow-up called Con Fantasia, with the imagination, because this requires imagination, stimulation of the imagination more than anything else. And so it is, I did organize those texts in this way. First, you select source domains, and then link these to lexical fields which are connected in actual discourse. So let's start with the first error that I mentioned. I'm hot. The first thing you do is to say, well, things like heat, patience, and sleep are contained in a town. Think of them as being in a container. That's your source domain. So if you are hot, then the container is the body, and the body has it. If it's outside, it's nature, and nature makes it. If it's in a cup of coffee, the cup of coffee is the container. So you got three verbs here, got it? O caldo, e caldo, fa caldo. Let me try French. J'ai chaud, il est chaud, c'est chaud, il fait. Huh?
Yeah.
Got it. That's the source domains. That's how I, in my own books, would introduce these verbs connected to these lexical fields, and then we conjugate them. And it's simple to conjugate them because you've got the concept in mind. Second thing, you select target domains, love, weather, emotions, whatever it is, that are representative of speech acts or conversational themes. So let's say you want to talk about love. Let's say we choose love as our target domain. What source domains do I need? Well, I need sweetness, as we just saw. By the way, the opposite is true. When love doesn't work in English, it becomes not sweet, but bitter. It's interesting because when I was teaching this and preparing it, I was thinking, because the consumer would have been English speaking. There's an English expression, our love is very salty. Oh, no, so spicy. Spicy. But it's salty. It's salty in Italian. And I made a mistake. I put the other way around, right? And someone wrote to me and says, boy, you Italians are really strange. I went, oh, heck, I got the wrong source domain. And third thing, searching texts and then organizing them in such a way, by text instead of conversation. I always thought you go into a store, you need practical communicative formulas to do it. Of course you do. But you can also expand upon it. One year, I actually taught a course using opera to teach Italian. Now, I play the piano. I actually professionally.
Okay.
I have, oh yeah, no. I have an ARCT, and I was supposed to be a musician. I even had a band, which I want you to look up, called the Semiotones, for which I composed all the music, and it all went to a charity, the Hospital for Sick Kids. She was the manager. For what? 12 years. We collected over $70,000.
Also, just sorry, side note, if you play it on any streaming service, every stream, money goes to sick kids. We don't get any money.
Yeah.
So like years later, it's
Do it!
legacy.
Or I'll never talk to you again. So, yeah. So what I did, and I had actually a singer, a soprano, who actually became famous. Her name is Agnes something. She now recorded for Sony, because in that class there was a Sony director who was there to learn it. We would take an aria from an opera. She would sing it, I accompany, and then I get the class to sing along. Then I would explain the meaning. By the end, now you'd say, how weird. How would any of these go into the store and say, you know, she burns at the stake, eh? Which is from Il Trovatore. It's not common Italian, but imagine burning at the stake as a way of thinking, and then you can easily acquire the more interesting things. Did they learn Italian by the end of it? I think they did. And they're going to claim that they really did. One thing, they enjoyed it, loved it. Number two, they were learning it in a form that is really into the conceptual system. You have no idea when you're learning opera. You have no choice. Got it? And one thing I noticed, because they sang it, There was no interference in the phonology. That really surprised me, and I have no theory for it, by the way. Incidentally, one year, one of the students in the class, it was a continuing studies, he was a Protestant minister. He insisted on singing arias from Don Giovanni, the philanderer. No, I found it a bit strange, fine. He had not a bad voice. Course ends, he calls me at home. This is the era before the internet. And he says, I went to see Don Giovanni at the, wherever it was called, the O'Keefe. I was disappointed. I said, well, what happened? Well, the one who had my part couldn't really sing it and pronounce the words correctly. Wow. Amazing to me that he would come up with this explanation. Okay, next thing. So, next part.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Alarm's getting me off.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Okay. So here's an example of what could happen in a conceptual syllabus. Let's say you choose time is a quantity. Got it. It is a quantity in Italian. For example,
I'm gonna determine that.
if you say something like, if you ask me in Italian, how old are you? If you would have to use this kind of thought, how many years do you have? And my answer would be, I have many years. And the response to that would be, oh, but you carry them well. This actually happened as a conversation. So if you're going to learn Italian, you're going to have to learn that there is going to be that kind of thing occurring here. So there's, I'm using here vocabulary, grammar, and speech functions. In other words, this is the conceptual system, this is the linguistic system, and this is the communicator. Time is a living entity. Il tempo vola, il tempo non perdona. Verbs such as volare, perdonare, discourse form, and on. Got it? And on and on. You can organize this. Now, is it sequential? Is it consecutive? It is, because at a certain concepts, I found out, require verbs that are in a certain tense more than in another tense. So that comes into the picture in determining where they should occur in the flow. Got it? In the flow of things. The other thing is that, sequential, is that you don't have to really worry about teaching vocabulary at all. It's already connected to the concepts and it occurs on itself, but you do have to teach the grammar. So it's kind of a sidebar grammar. Okay, at this point, the verb fare comes up. I need to talk about the weather today. Well, I have to teach you the present tense. Well, what about if I wanted to do it yesterday? Well, I'm going to introduce the past tense right now for that verb and let it go. Got it? Leave it alone. Then what if the past tense comes up again? I noticed that the student is able to extrapolate the system, the patterns, much like they did in the audiovisual or the audiolingual method, and then map it on to the new concepts. Do errors occur? Yes, they do. But there are errors that are negligible, errors in conjugation and so on. They're not the kinds of errors that I started off with, which nobody understands what's going on. Right? Leave your values. What are you talking about here? That never happens. What happens is that, oh, yeah, I understand what you're meaning, but you should be better at your grammar. That's actually a compliment, if you think about it, if that's what's left over. Let's keep going.
That's it.
That's it?
That's
okay.
all you gave me.
Okay, let me conclude. Okay, let me conclude.
That's all you gave me.
My God, I wrote a lot. Okay, let me have some concluding reflections. I love this. I've always enjoyed it. This allows me to bring semiotics, linguistics, teaching all together. I'm going to miss this a lot. I'm going to be 73 this year, so it's going to be hard for me to give this up. I love this. Love students. And I love my band, which you will too, by the way. Let me go back to the original calcs that I started off with. Two of his calcs, I think, can bring this whole thing to a conclusion. The first one, he was recorded from a helpline in Australia. Here it goes like this. He says, if you understand English, press 1. If you do not understand English, press 2. Come on, guys. The second one, I think, summarizes it all. In a sign in Mexico, he found this. Broken English spoken perfectly here. Thank you so much for listening to me. I will send you that email, then whatever it's called, attachments or so on, if you write to me, okay? Otherwise, I won't. Questions? This is the most, yeah, okay, go on.
So the conceptual metaphors, are they common across cultures?
Yes. No, okay, wonderful question. Okay. When I send you this attachment, I go into great detail there. If you take the love is sweet metaphor, okay, it's found in a large number of cultures. Research is now showing. But if it comes to a taste, what the difference is lexical. I showed you the difference. I'm serious about the chicken. There are cultures that actually use meat as an expression of love. Love is a meaty taste. I don't know how to put it, okay? Once you understand that, then some of the vocabulary and some of the way it's put together in discourse starts to make sense. Number one. They're not all universal. What is universal is the blending of experiences that come from the body and from history onto the lexical fields, the source domains, which coalesce to form a system of thought and language, which drives it. It also drives the syntax. The biggest debate of all comes from the Chomskyan world of, is syntax separate from meaning? No, it isn't. I actually like Noam Chomsky, I do. But this is wrong. No problem saying it. And if you read it, you'll see how position of words and so on is not due to some deep structure or to some D rules or so on, but to the way the concepts can be emphasized by moving them around. This happened in Latin, it happens in Russian, which doesn't really have a linear syntax. Much more difficult in the Chinese language, especially Mandarin, because the order does dictate the meaning more and more. Okay, I'm not sure about it. I have students who are working on it right now, finding out in languages which are isolating, they're called, rather than agglutinative, how this fits in. Number one. Second, remember the love. If you put love in the middle, you'll get plants, you'll get, like, our love is deeply rooted. You'll get magic, I'm enchanted by her. You'll get my love is a sweetheart. You will get buildings built on solid. Got it? If you count these around by looking at actual text and doing, mining data on the internet, and I have someone in Israel, you know him, Yair Neumann, who does exactly this, you will find that it's denumerable. So I did it for Italian and English. For love, I found that Italian had something like 18 of those circles going around. English had 40. I don't want to interpret it. Could be that there's more of an obsession with love or more of a literary tradition involved with it, going back to, I don't know, Chaucer and so on. I don't know. I have no idea, although there is a tradition in Italian as well. Whatever it is. So I've come up with the idea that this concept, love, is more productive conceptually in English than it is in Italian. That's a major difference. And I think that's a discovery. Got it. The third part to all of this is that it changes over time. And that this kind of thought can actually, it's everywhere in slang, for example. Slang is not literal, never has been, never will be. Slang is a very powerful language, extremely powerful, because it's almost poetic in its structure. So I'm referring to one of the functions that Roman Jakobson used to talk about. Don't worry about who Roman Jakobson is, but he's in that book in as well. The poetic function is a very powerful one. It's this. I wrote a book on emoji called The Semiotics of Emoji, which came out last year. And I noticed that emoji have the same poetic function of these things. In other words, it doesn't decorate the text. It reinforces it, elaborates it, and sometimes explains it in ways that are very poetic rather than straightforward, literal. There are also other functions for emoji. I mean, you start off with an emoji in the text and you finish one. If you're on a friendly terms with someone and there's no emoji in the text, the first thing you're going to suspect, are you angry at me? Where's my smiley? Come on. So there are also communicative emphatic functions, but there's also these ones, the poetic and emotive functions, which are marvelous. I forgot what else I was going to say. Okay, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That was very eye-opening. When I was listening to your presentation, and even when I was reading your publications before this class, when you talk about the concept of semiotics, I can't help but thinking back to Michael Holliday's economic functional linguistics.
Absolutely.
So I wonder what's your take on
very
this?
close. Yeah, it is a systemic. Yeah.
Yeah, like what's your take on his approach?
Love it.
Teaching and learning, like
love it.
when it comes to dispersonality.
Yeah. By the way, is he still alive? Do you know? I don't.
That's the way that.
Oh yeah. We used to meet all the time at conferences. We liked each other a lot. And there was a systemic linguistic society that I was a member of for many years. They are semioticians. He admitted it openly. Others don't. But it is semiotics. His work, for example, on how texts drive the sequence of events, textual structure, not grammatical structure. That's crucial. That's exactly what semioticians do. It's marvelous. Yeah. So it's there. His 1975 book about learning languages, to me, is a continuation of what Vygotsky did in the 1930s and how children develop a kind of textual, poetic version of how they do this. By the way, it's in childhood development, this. This is not, devoid of developmental structure. In fact, in my view, metaphorical structure, poetic structure occurs before any other. I always give the example of my own grandson, who's 24 now. He when he was born, he lived with us at home, and he was about 14, 15. At the time, my father, which is his great-grandfather, was there as living with us as well. He would make him juice in the morning, squeeze orange juice. My great-grandson needs to have the best things, not stuff bought at a store. So he'd go down there, and he loved my father. And he'd go, "No, Nino, juice." That's why he would use the word juice. He would point to it. One day, we were sitting on a couch. We had a cat. The cat was named Pumpkin. So you can imagine the color of the cat, right? Walked in front of us. My grandson looks at me, points to the cat and goes, "Juice." Picked it up right away. He was using the process of mapping the experiences in one domain, which were imprinted in that word juice, and then applying it to another domain that he saw connected to it in that sensory way. That's exactly how languages learn. That's what Vygotsky was talking about. It's innate. In fact, it's wrong, but it is brilliant. In fact, I was tempted to write "A Cat Named Juice" as a poem to follow it up and read it to him. It works all the time. If children see a moon in the sky and they don't have a concept for it, but they have the concept for ball, they say, "Oh, there's a ball in the sky." The general term, by the way, I didn't want to bring semiotics in again, but I will. It's called iconicity. This is an iconic osmosis between forms based on resemblance, and then they are embedded in the different forms and are connected in that way. Don't worry about it, okay? But there is a theory and model. I'm not inventing these. I'm not making these up. I wish I would have been more rich and famous. I'm a carrier, a messenger of this, but it's fascinating. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it falls in with that whole area there. It's non-Chomskyan, if that's what you want me to say. Absolutely not. I do. I do. It's non-Chomskyan. It's not. Universal grammar. What the heck is that? That's universal grammar? That's a universal imagination. And that's an imaginative structure that is occurring at the same time, and it's used all the time. We're creative people, species. We're all people. We're a creative species. I'm pretty sure that animals can talk and communicate much more efficiently than we do, but can they come up with metaphors? That's the test to me. That's the litmus test. Any other questions? Honestly, I'm really tempted to say let's go to l'espresso and have a glass of prosecco together, which is rather appropriate, but I would probably end up in jail for doing it, and this is Canada, not Italy. Any other? Are we done? Yeah.
I have one very broad question.
Yeah.
That has to do with what you were talking about, the integrated syllabus.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much interested in this idea because it's so difficult to introduce integration into, for example, teacher education or even, I don't know, regular teacher practices when we teach languages.
Yeah.
So what are your, I don't know, opinions, reflections, arguments, like how to move towards
it's the most difficult, it's the most difficult thing to do. It's easier to go the other way around.
Totally.
And then see, by the end of it, let's get to meaning. But we are left with what Larry Sullenker said in 1972, that why is it that only 5% of our students when they graduate have native-like proficiency? And my view is that they are not taught to manage and negotiate the new meanings, which are, as shown there, connected to cultural behaviors and symbols. If there is an approach, in my view, that is all-inclusive and holistic, it would be the semiotic. It would be. In fact, some semioticians today, I don't know if you were involved with Ina Semetsky.
Yes.
We invented a new field called edu-semiotics. I love this little play on words, which is dealing exactly with how to do this. It's done more and more often in mathematics, which I'm also interested in teaching, because it's easier to do that because you can control the meaning within certain domains like geometry or arithmetic. You can't do it with language. Expands. It's hard to bring it in and say, I'm going to restrict it to this. Oh, it's hard. My goal is to say, so what? Why should we make anything easy? Then we may have an algorithm or a robot teach it. This takes a human being in a Socratic dialogue, in a back and forth, because I really believe that you get to discover things in the dialogue. You get to discover who you are by getting to know who the other person is. And it also, in my view, really increases the respect we have for each other through the dialogue. That's what I think.
Another question about translators.
Yes.
So translators, that's why.
Oh, by the way, I remember something that I wanted to add to the other one. I'll get back to it. Go.
Okay, but so you know, all the language teachers out there are saying, oh, don't use a translator because of this reason, right? You miss the conceptual metaphors that are behind, and you're just doing the level 3 calcing, right?
Yes.
With a translator. But do you know anything about advances in artificial intelligence and the
Yes,
use of
I do.
translators?
I do.
And are they able to?
Yeah. I do. I just finished a book on artificial intelligence and how Google uses n-grams together with a huge mining of texts and reducing them to a series of conceptual metaphors as well.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, Google is very smart. Why wouldn't they? In fact, some of the translations now are pretty accurate.
Pretty close.
Pretty close, and that's because they caught on. In fact, machine translation, which started in the 1960s, one of the first questions was exactly that. And one of the interesting anecdotes was that when they were translating idioms, they produced this kind of stuff. But let me go back to another thing. I talked about conceptual metaphors. Well, there are two other things that Lakoff and Johnson correctly separate. One is metonymy. Get your butt over here. That's not a metaphor. That's using a part of the body to represent the whole body. And when I say there are many faces in the side, it's not a metaphor. It's saying that the face represents the person and so on. So that's separate. And the other thing that's separate, and I didn't get into them here, but I did in the presentation, is irony. Irony turns metaphor on its head. The hardest thing to do is to tap into satire, irony, parody in another language, because that's deeply rooted in this and plays on it, and it has its own, traditions of how to bring this out, and those change from generation to generation. Right now, I'm one of my conclusions in this book is that we need comedy more than ever before. Bakhtinian laughter. That's the only way to defeat the kind of vitriolic discourse that I see out there from a guy with orange hair. So it's comedy, it's laughter. And you know who knew this from the very beginning? A good friend who passed away. Was it 3 years ago, Umberto Eco? Yeah. 2 or 3 years ago. Great semiotician, Umberto Eco, who wrote this marvelous novel, The Name of the Rose. He wrote it here in Toronto, by the way, in 1979. Who said, what brought down the medieval ages? Laughter. Which is very Bakhtinian, if you know anything about semiotics. Laughter brought it down. There is no other way to bring this down. It brought Mussolini down. The radio stations were starting to make fun of him.
Saturday Night Live.
Yes, Saturday Night Live is. They are heroes. They're American heroes. Bill Maher, which I never liked. I thought he was disgusting. I love him now. And on and on. So how do you get into this? You can't really translate that into another language, because I'm getting to your translation. How do you translate irony? How do you translate satire? You don't. You reconceptualize it. You cannot tell a joke directly in another language through calquing or through. You have to rethink it completely. Wow, is that difficult to do? But that's what we're trained or paid to do, isn't it, as teachers in the end? So let's try. I said, let's try. Maybe not succeed. So what? Keep going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.